China made a trillion-dollar bet on the future, and if they lose, the foundation of the modern world could fracture with them. For the last 40 years, one country has been building at a scale that history has never witnessed. They have erected cities in the clouds, tamed the world's most violent rivers, and laid down infrastructure so massive it defies easy comparison. They did it all to secure their rise, to insulate 1.4 billion people from the whims of nature. But their greatest projects were built for a climate that may no longer exist. They are now facing a force that cannot be negotiated with, a new reality of physics. What happens when the dams built to stop once-in-a-century floods are hit with 2 in a decade? What happens when ghost cities built for millions are threatened by expanding deserts? Let us know in the comments below what you think is the biggest threat China faces. A lot of people who love our documentaries forget to subscribe, and they miss our new investigations. If you appreciate this kind of deep dive, hitting that subscribe button is the single most important way to ensure we can keep making them. It is urgent, it's important, and it means we can continue bringing you these stories. Let's begin. China's modern story is written in concrete and steel, but it all depends on water. The country is defined by a profound geographical imbalance. The south, historically lush and water-rich. The north, an arid industrial heartland that produces half the country's food and powers its economic engine. A nation divided by its own hydrology. For decades, the solution was simple: brute force engineering. Move the water. So they conceived of a project of almost unimaginable scale: the south to north water diversion, a man-made river system with 3 colossal routes designed to physically replumb the continent, moving 45 billion cubic meters of water every single year from the Yangtze River Basin in the south to the thirsty plains of the north. It is the largest and most expensive water transfer project ever attempted by humanity. Total cost estimates soar past $200 billion. It was designed to be the final solution, the project that would secure China's food supply, fuel its great northern cities, and correct a flaw in the country's own geography. It should have been a permanent fix, but here is the part they didn't anticipate. The source is now under threat. The glaciers that feed the Yangtze are melting. The droughts that once plagued the north are now striking the south with terrifying new intensity. So the real question is, did China engineer the 8th wonder of the modern world, or did they just build the planet's most expensive aqueduct from one drying basin to another? China's fight against nature began long before this. It is a core part of its national identity, the philosophy of Reinding Shengtan. Man must conquer nature. It was an idea that powered the country through the 20th century, a belief that with enough will, enough labor, and enough concrete, any natural obstacle could be overcome. This wasn't just policy, it was a declaration of war against geography itself. And for a time, it looked like they were winning. The most visible symbol of this victory was a structure so large it literally slowed the rotation of the Earth, the Three Gorges Dam. Completed in 2012, it was the ultimate expression of this conquest. Spanning the Yangtze River in Hubei province, it is the world's largest power station. A wall of concrete and steel over a mile long and 600 feet high, holding back a reservoir that stretches for nearly 400 miles. It was designed to do 3 things: tame the Yangtze's devastating floods, which had killed hundreds of thousands throughout the 20th century, generate massive amounts of clean electricity to power China's industrial revolution, and improve river shipping deep into the country's interior. On paper, it was a triumph of centralized planning and raw engineering power, a monument to a nation bending a river to its will. But the river is starting to push back. The dam was built using decades of historical hydrological data that showed predictable seasonal flows, a pattern of life that the engineers believed they understood. But that data is becoming obsolete. The climate of the 21st century is not behaving like the climate of the 20th. In the summer of 2022, the script flipped completely. The Yangtze River Basin, the very source of southern China's famous abundance of water, was gripped by the most severe heatwave and drought in over 60 years. Riverbeds turned to cracked earth. Shipping channels became impassable. Major industrial hubs like Chongqing and Sichuan, home to factories for companies like Toyota and Foxconn, were forced to shut down as hydropower output collapsed. The Three Gorges Dam reservoir fell to levels that shocked observers, its water level dropping more than 10 meters below the normal post-flood season level. It was built to stop floods. It was not built to operate in a basin that was functionally turning into a desert. Less water flowing into the reservoir meant less electricity flowing out. The dam's power generation plummeted by over 50% at the height of the drought. This was not a minor disruption. It was a system-wide failure that cascaded through the national power grid, causing blackouts and rationing in cities with tens of millions of people. The ultimate symbol of control was suddenly at the mercy of a weather pattern it was never designed for. What do you think? Can a dam this large ever truly be future-proof? Let us know in the comments. And yet, that is only half of the problem, because the opposite is also true. The The droughts are punctuated by floods of an intensity that pushes the dam to its absolute limits. Just 2 years before the Great Drought in the summer of 2020, the Yangtze Basin saw record-breaking rainfall. The dam experienced its largest flood peak since it became fully operational. Water inflow rates surged to 75,000 cubic meters per second. The operators were forced to open 11 of the spillway gates, unleashing a torrent of water downstream to relieve the immense pressure on the structure. The dam held. It performed its primary function. But it came at a price. Cities downstream, including Wuhan, were put on red alert. The act of saving the dam contributed to flooding elsewhere. It was a brutal demonstration of the dam's fundamental paradox. It can protect the areas immediately behind it, but in an extreme event, it can only pass that threat downstream. It does not make the water disappear. It just moves the danger. This reveals the project's deeper vulnerability. The engineers planned for a once-in-100-years flood, but climate scientists now project that due to atmospheric warming, such events could become once in a decade or more. The safety margins that were considered conservative 20 years ago are now seen as dangerously thin. The structure is being tested by two opposite and equally powerful extremes: droughts that starve it of the water it needs to generate power, and deluges that threaten to overwhelm its storage capacity entirely. The dam regulates the river, but it cannot regulate the sky, and the sky is becoming increasingly violent. This is the new reality that China's planners are facing, an era of hydrological whiplash. The infrastructure built for stability is now caught in a cycle of radical instability. This brings us back to the south-to-north water diversion, a project even larger, more complex, and more exposed than the Three Gorges Dam. Its success isn't just dependent on one river. It is dependent on the health of an entire watershed that is now demonstrating signs of critical stress. If the source of the water, the Yangtze, is becoming this unreliable, what does that mean for the 440 million people in the north who are depending on it to arrive? The engineering behind the water transfer is genuinely breathtaking. We are talking about a system of canals, tunnels, and aqueducts that, if laid end-to-end, would stretch from New York to Los Angeles. Consider just one piece of it, the Central Route. This route alone is over 1,200 kilometers long. It starts at the Danjiangkou Reservoir on a tributary of the Yangtze and snakes its way north, carrying water entirely by gravity to the sprawling megacities of Beijing and Tianjin. Let me say that again, entirely by gravity. To achieve this, engineers had to design a canal with a gradient so perfectly and minutely calibrated that it would not require a single pumping station across its entire length. A deviation of just a few centimeters over dozens of miles could halt the flow. It's like building a perfectly level shelf that stretches across a continent. And along the way, it had to cross over 200 existing rivers. Most were crossed with overhead aqueducts. But the biggest obstacle was the Yellow River, the cradle of Chinese civilization, and a notoriously difficult river to manage, choked with silt. You cannot simply build a bridge for water over it. A surface canal would contaminate the clean southern water with the Yellow River's sediment. The solution was something out of science fiction. They decided to go under. They drilled two massive tunnels, each nearly 2.5 miles long, deep beneath the riverbed. Giant tunnel boring machines, not unlike Sandy from the Lake Mead project, chewed through the earth, laying down concrete tunnel segments as they went. An entire river of clean water now flows silently underneath another major river. In a self-contained tube, a pristine artery protected from the muddy torrent above. It is an engineering feat that borders on the miraculous. We put a considerable amount of effort into these deep dives. If you're finding this valuable, please take a moment to like the video and share it. It tells YouTube our work is important and helps us reach more people, especially family and friends who might not know the sheer scale of what's happening in the world. The project was a statement, a declaration that no physical barrier was too great, but the cost was not just financial, measured in hundreds of billions of dollars. It was also human. To create the massive reservoirs needed to feed the canals, the government had to relocate over 350,000 people. Entire villages, ancestral homes, and farms that had been in families for generations were submerged. It was a monumental sacrifice, justified by the state as necessary for the greater national good, a tax paid in heritage, for the promise of water security. For years, the project seemed to be working. Water began flowing north in 2014. It replenished reservoirs in Beijing, flushed out polluted urban rivers, and provided a lifeline to a region that was literally drilling its aquifers dry. The North China Plain was experiencing subsidence, the ground itself sinking as underground water was pumped out faster than nature could replenish it. The south-to-north water was supposed to stop that. It was supposed to let the aquifers recover. It was supposed to be the permanent dividend from their massive investment. But the 2022 drought in the Yangtze Basin sent a shockwave through that entire calculation. For the first time, officials were faced with an unthinkable question. What if there is not enough water to send north? The project was predicated on the assumption that the south would always have a surplus. The drought revealed that assumption to be fragile. Suddenly, provincial governments in the south began to see that water not as a surplus to be exported, but as a strategic reserve for their own survival. The project designed to resolve a regional conflict over water was now at risk of creating a new one, this time between the south and the central government. The engineering had solved the problem of how to move the water. It never solved the question of what happens when the water is not there to move. Recognizing that simply moving water around would not be enough, China embarked on another equally ambitious strategy. It was a plan not just to manage water, but to reimagine the very fabric of their cities. They called it the Sponge City Initiative. The idea was brilliant in its simplicity. For centuries, urban design has been about fighting water, paving surfaces, building concrete channels, and creating sewer systems to get rainwater out of the city as fast as possible. This approach, however, leads to flash floods when drainage systems are overwhelmed, and it wastes a valuable resource. The Sponge City concept flips that logic on its head. Instead of expelling water, the city is designed to absorb it. The program was launched in 2015 with 30 pilot cities. The goal was to retrofit urban areas with a suite of green infrastructure. Permeable pavements that allow water to soak through into the ground instead of running off into sewers. Green roofs covered in vegetation that can capture and hold rainfall. Rain gardens and urban wetlands designed to collect, filter, and store stormwater. In theory, these cities would act like natural sponges. During a heavy downpour, they would soak up the excess water, preventing floods. Then, during dry periods, that stored water could be slowly released, used for irrigation, or for replenishing the local aquifer. It was a sophisticated, ecologically inspired solution, a step away from the brute force concrete of the past, toward a more harmonious model of urban development. It was China's version of conservation, its attempt to close the loop. And in many cases, it showed remarkable promise. Cities like Wuhan, one of the pilot sites, invested billions in creating lakes and green spaces to absorb rainfall. Early results were positive. Smaller storms were managed more effectively. Localized flooding decreased. It seemed like a genuine breakthrough, a way for cities to become resilient in the face of a more volatile climate. It was designed for a future of more intense rain. It should have been the perfect defense. But then came the summer of 2021 and the city of Zhengzhou. Zhengzhou was one of the Sponge City pilot projects. It had invested over $8 billion in new infrastructure. Then, in the space of just 3 days, the city was hit by 617 millimeters of rain. That is the equivalent of an entire year's average rainfall. It was a weather event so extreme that meteorologists called it a once-in-a-thousand-year storm. The sponge was drowned. The city's brand-new drainage systems, its permeable surfaces, its rain gardens, they were all instantly and completely overwhelmed. Water poured into subway tunnels, trapping hundreds of passengers and leaving more than a dozen dead. Streets turned into raging rivers. The city of 12 million people was paralyzed. Zhengzhou was a terrifying lesson. The Sponge City concept works, but it only works up to a certain point. It is designed for storms that are more intense than the historical average. It is not designed for a complete breakdown of historic weather patterns. It was built for a tougher climate, not a different one. The disaster exposed the fundamental limitation of even the cleverest engineering. You can plan for the predictable to get worse. You cannot easily plan for the unimaginable to become reality. And across China, the unimaginable is happening with increasing frequency. This forces us to look even higher, to the source of it all, to the roof of the world, the Tibetan Plateau. This vast, high-altitude expanse is often called Asia's water tower. It is the origin point for 10 of Asia's largest rivers, including the Yangtze and the Yellow River. The lifeblood of China, India, Vietnam, and several other nations flows from its glaciers and snowfields. It is, in effect, the hydrological battery for nearly 2 billion people, and that battery is beginning to fail. The Tibetan Plateau is warming at more than twice the global average rate. The consequences are catastrophic. More than 80% of its glaciers are now in retreat. These are not just scenic blocks of ice. They are ancient, natural reservoirs. For millennia, they have provided a critical service, storing precipitation as ice during the cold, wet seasons and releasing it as meltwater during the hot, dry seasons. This glacial melt ensures that rivers like the Yangtze have a stable, reliable flow even during periods of low rainfall. It is nature's own regulation system. And now, that system is breaking down. In the short term, accelerated melting actually increases river flow. It creates a temporary abundance, a false sense of security. China's engineers see more water in the rivers and believe their supply is robust. But it is a fatal illusion. That water is not revenue. It is the bank account being drained. Every drop of accelerated meltwater is a piece of the permanent glacial reservoir that will not be there next year or the year after. Scientists project that at the current rate of warming, 2/3 of the plateau's glaciers could be gone by the end of the century. Once they disappear, they are not coming back on any human timescale. What does this mean for the mega projects? It means they are all connected to a dying source. The Three Gorges Dam depends on a stable Yangtze. The south to north water diversion is an artery connected to a heart that is under immense strain. The project was conceived as moving a permanent surplus from south to north, but climate change is rewriting that entire equation. The surplus is revealing itself to be a temporary windfall from melting glaciers. Once that buffer is gone, the Yangtze